Welcome to a very special episode of Raul's World of Synths. Today we're going to be doing an introduction into a new video series specifically on the quadrophonic possibilities in the Doepfer system. To be more specific, we're going to be actually looking at two different approaches to quadrophonic using a couple of examples from a few of the Doepfer system manuals. The A144 and then the A174 manuals, for those of you keeping track of that out there. But before we do, let's just briefly talk about what we mean when we talk about quadrophonic. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail because there's a lot of stuff having to do with quadrophonic that is a little bit outside of the scope of what we will be talking about. But what we mean by that, quadrophonic or also quadrasonic, involves 4 channels of sound. And originally when it was done, it was usually 4 channels of sound using speakers positioned in 4 corners of a room. Now, I'm getting my information from Wikipedia, so it must be true, right? Earliest uses of this involved the use of reel-to-reel tape. There were some loudspeaker performances back in the 50s and 60s by some avant-garde composers using this kind of system. And then there were even some attempts in the 70s for quadrophonic in the home. And now that we know, sort of the background and a little bit of history on it, for our purposes, we're going to be exploring sort of the movement of sound using a Doepfer modular in 4 channels. Now, since you're watching this video, you'll more than likely be watching in stereo, which is going to have some limitations to what we can and can't do. Obviously, I won't be able to physically move it around the room, so I'm going to have to work within the stereo field. So to do that, what I've done is I've taken the liberty of repositioning some of the items that we'll be sort of playing around with in the stereo field so you can kind of experience them. But we will sort of explain that as we move along. Now that we have that complete, let's talk about the first patch. I'm going to put it up on the screen so you can see what I'm actually talking about here. This is the Doepfer A144 manual, the page that specifically talks about quadrophonic. And in this, you can see that there are 4 VCAs, and they're sort of feeding out into the quad space over on the right. And then on the far left, you have the Doepfer A144 module that is feeding 4 of its outputs to those 4 VCAs. Now, if you watched the Doepfer A144 series, you saw something similar to this, where we did, I believe it was waveforms. But this time we're going to do a little bit of sound sources that are a little varied this time for something a little more interesting. And what we're doing here, you can see that they're sort of laid out on this diagram over here. You have VCA2 going to the left, and you have VCA1 going over to the right, at the top, and so forth. VCA3 down bottom left. We can't really do that in stereo. So what I've done is on my A135 down here in the bottom, you can see that these 4 VCAs are going out to my recorder. What I've done for positioning is VCA1 is going to be over on the far left, and then VCA2 is going to be right at around 11 o'clock. And then this one is going to be right at around 2 o'clock, number 3. And then VCA4 is going to be over on the far right of your stereo field. So while you're listening, you'll be able to sort of hear that, hopefully along the way. And then that pretty much takes care of the nuts and bolts kind of stuff. And now we're just going to kind of jump in and start creating our patch here. Now, I do have a few notes. I'm going to be sort of going off of that. The easiest part of this patch that I can actually use to set up is going to be actually the morph controller. So over here in the center, if we look at that, pretty simple, 4 outputs. Output 1 is going to be going to CV input 1 of our mixer. And then output 2, you guessed it, is going to go to CV input number 2 of our second VCA. And then output 3 is going to be going down to CV input 3. And then output 4 going down to CV input 4. There we go. All right. So now that we got the morphing controller sort of patched, let's start putting together our sound sources. I sort of made some arrangements prior to this just to get something interesting. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be taking the A150 down here, voltage controlled switch. I have some pitches feeding in there for my two A155 sequencers. I'm going to take those and I'm going to actually fire them over to my A111. So there we go, over to A111. CV input number 1. And then I had a couple of waveforms going from there. Let me get some cables to accommodate this. And we're going to pulse out from here. And we're actually taking that down into the A196 signal in input right there. And then from there, we're actually going out from our phase lock loop from the phase comparator section. We're going over to this A131. I think it was input 1. There we go. And then we're also going from the A111 out down into our A110 down here in the bottom. I'm calling this one down here VCO2 because I am going to actually get another A110 involved. So I'm going to take, let's see which waveform did I have for that. Saw wave out, down into CV input of this. And then my A110, I actually have the pulse wave out, just straight up pulse wave right here, going over into audio input 2 of this VCA. And then this output is going to go up into our signal input of this guy right here. So you should be able to hear that now. And just for the moment, I'm going to actually bring that down a little bit. So we'll kind of bring that back a little bit later so you can listen to it. And now let's go ahead and get channel 2 set up using the clock out of the A155. So I'm going to be taking clock out from over here. There we go. Over to our quantized stored random voltages. And if you look over at the quantized stored random voltages, you can see a little bit of activity from there. And I'm going to be going over there and taking my my quantized random voltages, taking them over to the dual quantizer, just because I want to. It's kind of playing around with this. It sounded pretty cool. So I'm going to take the CV out from there. And let's see, over in my A156, I went down to VCO, or actually up to VCO1. It's up in the top section. So there we go. And then from there, I actually had a couple outputs going. So let's see. That one I think I had, saw out of that. And that one's going to be going over to our A121 audio input. There we go. And then I have the pulse wave, straight up pulse wave going out from this A110 down into channel 2. Now you're probably going to hear this. Well, it's not so loud. So I'll leave that there. And just hopefully I don't have a cable not plugged in all the way. We'll worry about that in a moment.